Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. Great to have Ilka and Mary back on the show today. Ilka, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Not bad. Not bad. Things cooling down here. And Mary, how are things in your part of the world?
They're great, actually. We're having a rainy April. Finally, rain coming in. I mean, not
good.
Tons of rain, but some rain, which is really nice.
And of course, we've got Zach here as well. How you doing, Zach?
I'm great. How are you, Matthew?
Good. All right. Well, we've got a great long-ish interview, but some really great content to get into this week. So let's thank our sponsors so we can crack right into it.
Let's do. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks also to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors and Proseco. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Great. Now, Ilka, you're doing a little bit of work with this week's guest. Is that right?
Yeah. We're working together on a project right now. And I have known Laura for many years, being part of the Philadelphia Passive House. So it was great to finally interview her.
Yeah. And she describes a bit about that project. So we'll hear a little bit more about that. Any comments from you, Mary, about Laura before we get into it?
I've also known Laura for years, and it's great to go over sort of mutual history with her.
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing someone who is very wise about the industry and has so much experience seeing Passive House sort of come to America and mature over that time. So let's get into it. Here is Laura Blau of BluPath.
Okay, well, welcome, Laura Blau, principal of BluPath, and also, as I've just heard, on the board of South Philly Jam. Maybe at the end you'll sing a few notes for us. So can you tell us a little bit about your first steps in Passive House and what got you interested and the first training that you took?
So I've always been interested in sustainable design, and Paul and I started BluPath and left MGA Partners in order to have a firm that concentrated on sustainable design. But I had started to read about Passive House in the mid-2000, around 6, 7, and I met Harold Finnegan, who is an interesting sort of Goldwater Republican environmentalist. And he's also trains Olympic rowers. And I had met him through a woman who actually is an Olympic rower that I knew. And he was telling me he had started taking the Passive House training. And he was going to do an addition to his Victorian house in Derby. So anyways, having taken this training, he didn't take the exam, but he took the training. I signed him up for a luncheon seminar at Delaware Valley Green Building Council. I was on the residential group and on the board. So that was the first introduction, and I brought that introduction to what is now Green Building United, the former Delaware Valley Green Building Council. So then, shortly later, the recession knocked us on our backsides, and I had read about the training sessions, but it was just way too expensive to go to Iowa for 3 different sessions at 3 different times and 3 different airplanes and hotels, etc. But then there suddenly was a intensive in New York City at Parsons, a 2-week intensive. But we had just lost about 60% of our projects and had laid off most of our staff, and life was really miserable. And we didn't think we could afford it. So, I kind of put it aside until 3 a.m. the day before the application was due. I woke Paul up from a deep sleep. He doesn't like being woken up. And said, I think I have to do this. I think we can't sit here and lick our wounds. We have to do something positive and distinguish ourselves and do something good. So he said, go, I'll take care of the Nandor and take care of the business. So go do it. It sounds important. So I did. And Tim McDonald was in that class with me. And so I sometimes took the Bolt bus there and back, sometimes slept on friends' couches, sometimes stayed at the Chelsea. And I did that, made that happen. Didn't look back. It was really great. A couple of years later, Paul took the training, and so we both became consultants. So it was great. I went to my first conference in 2000. I got trained in 2009. So I went to the first conference in Iowa, 2009. I remember seeing Chris Benedict, and she discussed a multifamily project, affordable housing she was doing in New York City. And she showed herself doing blower door tests. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to do that. Here's a woman, doing that. And so when you see someone doing it, suddenly it's so important, mentorship. I mean, when suddenly something seems possible and reasonable. So Paul and I took BPI, building analyst training. And during the Great Recession, while there wasn't any architectural work, we did about 200 buildings and did energy audits and got a lot of boots on the ground, understanding of the dynamics of where leaks happen and they're not where you expect, and what's going down.
So quickly going back to your passive house training, that was actually before FIAS and PHI split, right? That was was still a combined training. Yeah, it was. Tim and I were both certified under both organizations. I mean, FIAS was just a subsidiary, and then the U.S. subsidiary taking care of things for international. So yeah, it was before the breakup, and it was very sad when the breakup happened. But it had its reasons, and in the end, I think it hasn't been terrible. Both organizations have challenged each other around certain issues, and I think it has helped improve both organizations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. So and I'm thinking back to the pre-Philadelphia Passive House group, where all of us still had to go to New York all the time, right? I remember going to New York just to see a blower door test as well. So, but then you were actually one of the people that organized the Philadelphia Passive House group, right?
Yeah. It was around, I think, 2014 when the next real class of Philadelphians became certified under FIAS, under PHI, under International. And I went to the New York Symposium Passive House Symposium, and there David Solomon walked up to me and introduced himself. He said, "You're Laura Blau, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I know Tim," and he says, "I should talk to you. We should start a Passive House group." And I remember saying, "Yeah, that's great." I mean, Tim and I had been, planting Passive House seeds all over the region, and sometimes doing presentations together, sometimes separately at cafes, at other nonprofits. So I said, "Yeah, but if someone is really willing to work, if we really have a group of people wanting to, because it's going to be work, it's going to take time and it's going to take effort and mission statements and all that." And we had our first meeting, and indeed we had, 15, 18 people there.
It was probably more than that.
20, I don't know, but it was a room full of people.
Yeah,
and it was a real group.
Yeah, it was a real group.
So we launched it, and we co-chaired that for the first number of years, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, and then you actually also helped facilitate a Passive House builder training in Philadelphia.
I want to go back a minute, because one of the things that I did do and insisted upon for our group, which is, I said it had to be non-denominational. Here we had a group of people who were international, and Tim and I were theists. And so I said, I won't join an organization that preferences one or the other. It needs to be non-denominational, no judgments, no infighting, just Passive House principles and building science, and the freedom to choose which program you want to work with, appropriate to your practice and your project. And that was one of the main bylaws that we had, one of the main tenets that we had in our organization, which was really important. And I think it is why that program and continues to have such strength, is that openness.
Yeah, and that's really a model program, because that's the organization that became Green Building United, right? It all fed into Green Building United.
Well, and one of my grouchiness with LEAD is that it became so proprietary, and I don't see any point in sustainable organizations fighting each other. There's much more important battles. There's whole mountains being chopped off and turned into coal. So we don't need to be fighting who's going to get to the top of the mountain, because it might not be there when we get to it. So we need to be supporting each other. And all these programs, they each have their pros and cons. None of them are perfect. And so the more we can, just move ahead and do great work, that's what's important.
And Mary, Green Building United was actually all the groups joining together, because before there was the Passive House group, there was the Living Building Challenge group, and the LEAD group, and then everyone joined into Green Building United. And I thought that was great. Also a model.
Was Green Building United started before or after the first FIAS builder training in Philadelphia?
I organized it in the late 2012, but the actual session was February of 2013, I believe. Yes. It was definitely 2016, 2017, somewhere in there, that Green Building United, brought in Living Building Challenge and the Passive House group and other things like that. But
you had done the builder training. You participate in it as well as helping to organize it. And how was that for you?
Oh, it was great. First of all, when they called me, when Kat and Mike called me to help them find a place to hold this, I contacted the Energy Coordinating Agency and the Energy Efficiency Building Hub, which then became the Consortium for Building Energy Innovation. It was the federal program down at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. And they ended up choosing and using the Navy Yard site for it. And then they allowed me to have a free seat. And I was the only woman and the only architect amongst about 40 contractors from east of the Mississippi. So I also knew that if I was going to do Passive House, I needed a team, a team that was going to drink the Kool-Aid with me and be able to work with me. So I called every contractor I knew, and it was a great class. I was very happy to be there. Got a lot of razzing being an architect and a woman, but it was fun, and I made lots of friends, and I learned a lot. So what was the main takeaways for an architect in that situation? And I think a lot of it was that you figure out how important sequencing is and simplifying details and thinking through their constructability. It was really great to hear the concerns and issues and what the focus of contractors are as opposed to what the focus of an architect is and where the gaps are between those two, and to learn how to build bridges there and make sure that you communicate well with your team.
Yeah, I think what's it's pretty amazing that even back then that you already acknowledged the problem, right? That we can all become Passive House consultants, but if we don't have builders to execute, there's nothing we can do, right? And we're still facing the problem. I think there's way more Passive House consultants and Passive House architects than there are.
Oh yeah.
So that's great. I think everyone should probably do what you did. Just kind of call up every builder, organize or help organize this builder training and just have them sign up, which is, I have brought a number of non-Passive House builders into the Passive House circle. Because when there isn't people, sometimes you have to hire people and then train them. And then hopefully they get all excited and they're good and they proceed and get it. We still need a medallion program, because just because the head honcho has Passive House certification, he's not on the job all the time. And we really need medallions specifically for tradesmen, like a medallion just for air sealing or a medallion for window install, so that they can get a little shorter, more targeted training for the boots on the ground. And I think that would go a long way to improve the fabrication of our buildings. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And then I guess moving on to one of your Passive House projects. So you basically got the builder ready to build your first Passive House in the Italian market. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So it was an interesting client, a young couple just married. She's from a mercantile family in the Italian market. He was a reluctant, not really wanting to be an urban dweller with a nice dog. And they both had engineering backgrounds, even though that's not the field that they were in. Although, the husband worked in the energy industry, actually. But they understood some of the basic principles of Passive House and had decided that that's what they wanted. And so they had contacted Tim McDonald and myself, and then a couple of non-Passive House contractors, our architects. And so it's competing with Tim. So I probably made the biggest mistake in the first interview, because I told her this is someone who's a foodie, right? She's been with a food family in the market, and she's into cooking and baking. And I told her she probably really shouldn't have her gas wolf range, but rather an induction range. And she looked at me like, "Are you crazy? No way." And for some reason, I said, "Well, maybe you should just go check them out." And I left that meeting thinking, boy, I blew it. I'm not going to get this job. But she went to a showroom. She tried it out. She said, she called me up and she said, "I'm game, and I'm choosing you." And so we began that process. And they are the client is so important. If the client doesn't hold tight to the mission, you're not going to get there. It really is a whole team effort. You have to have your contractor, your designer, as many of your sub engineers on board, and certainly the client, and holding tight to what those goals are is important. Yeah, there's, granite countertops and things that, that's the light, that the fly sees that shining light. And the next thing you're not getting that quality ERV. So, it's important to have everyone on board.
And there are quite a bit of challenges with this project, right? Because there was, it's basically new build on top of a warehouse.
Yeah. So this was a 7-up warehouse that the wife had bought or was gifted, I don't know, whatever, from her father, who has a meat business in the market. And so, we did a core drill near the front and thought we knew what was going on with the slab and the ground, but it turns out when we actually, we thought it wasn't, the steel frame inside of it wasn't substantial enough to hold a whole 2-story house. So we thought we would be digging, 3-4 foot wide holes, for footings, and that would be sufficient. But when we started that process and we did some more soil testing, we found out that, surprise, it was virgin soil right here in the middle of the Italian market. Who would have guessed? And that it had no compaction strength. So suddenly we had to tear out the whole slab and do spread footings, which were very expensive. And when we started tearing up the slab, it was, only 4 or 5 inches at the front, but it turned out to be like 12 inches at the rear. So that took quite an effort, much more. And so our contingency, most of it was eaten up in the first 3 weeks of the project. And as these projects go, anyone who's worked on projects, you get to the end and, you need that contingency. We certainly could have used it for the sunshade. There we were. And luckily, Chris was amazing. And his belief in the project and in beauty and architecture and both the function and aesthetic of that sunscreen, we both put in time that we weren't compensated for to make sure that happened, and didn't just end up being a visor, but the shaped sculptural element that it was intended to be. And it's perforated with an image of trees from the client's honeymoon. So they get shaded by their Hawaiian honeymoon trees.
That's great. That's really great. So you brought that expertise into your own building that you decided to do an interfit on.
Yeah. So I took over the general contracting. I've certainly made some mistakes. And one of the biggest ones was not showing contractors the door when they start not respecting a woman contractor, architect, owner. And when they aren't, following through on the instructions that have been given, just general, like, what are you doing? We talked about this yesterday. What's going on here? So that was a lesson that was hard to learn. During this time, of course, it was very hard to find contractors, passive house or not. Just it's a very hot market. We had some large, long delays, some of which were not in our control.
Well, can you describe the building for people who don't know? Because this is, doing an interfit on a building is a challenge, any building, but can you describe your building?
So this is a 175-year-old 4-unit apartment building in the historic Rittenhouse neighborhood, Rittenhouse Fittler Historic District. So we had to go through lots of historic commission trials and tribulations and approvals. And we won some really wonderful precedents. To be able to use passive house simulated divided light double hungs was a big win. And I really commend the commission for that. However, they were not going to let us exterior insulate our rear walls, even though our tests showed that they were porous as hell and probably the worst brick you could get in the day, unlike our front brick, which was the best brick you could get in the day, known across the country as Philadelphia brick. It is, when you do the moisture test, the Rillam tube test, over a 24-hour, it moves a quarter of an inch. So it is a perfect rain screen in the front. And the back, you're pouring water in that Rillam tube again and again and again because it's just sucking into that brick as a sponge. It's just cheap brick. It's the vinyl of its day. So the only way to save that wall, which is deteriorating from the inside when you air condition a 170-year-old building, it's pulling that water into the wall and it condenses on the inside and crumbles and turns to dust. So big pocketed and bricks, even though they looked perfectly fine on the outside, are very much compromised on the inside. They would not let us cover this historic brick on the rear, even though it was lousy and it's an alley with back ends of cars and trash cans and doggy bags. And so frustrated, I left after a second attempt to get their approval. And two people chased me out of the room. One was a building science academic from Harvard, who was also a preservationist, who said, "We're doing these same hygrothermic tests that you're doing and coming up with the same conclusion. We have to protect our buildings." I'm like, I tried. I tried, but I didn't succeed. And then another was Michael Sklaroff of Ballard Spar, who had been a former head of the commission and was a real estate lawyer, who said, "I bet you don't know about the Environmental Bill of Rights." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's a 1970 Constitution amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution that says you have to protect the environment, basically, for current and future generations." He says, "I think we have a case here." And I said, "That's great, but I really don't have money for a lawyer." And he said, "Well, come visit us anyway." And we did. And he said, "If you can find a nonprofit to sponsor you, we'll do this pro bono. We've talked to our board and we think it's worthy." So the North American Passive House Network became our sponsor. And onward we went. It was probably close to $100,000 of legal fees, but we prevailed. And the head of the Philadelphia lawyers came and talked to the commission and explained to them that the Constitution trumps the guidelines and that they had to consider the environment. We presented the same facts, the same environmental facts about the Anthropocene issues and carbon and the same hygrothermic models, only we had some experts besides myself presenting those same facts or verifying that what we had presented is true. And so they were able to save face and say, "Oh, now we understand." And so we were allowed to do that. Unfortunately, all the overruns and delays had cost so much money and lost income from what we thought would be the income from the building. We haven't been able to actually implement that rear eave system at this point, but we do hope eventually we will.
So you, by now, you actually moved into your house, into your building, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We actually moved into the third floor apartment just before COVID, thinking we had another month or two of work in our unit. When COVID hit, of course, everything shut down. And there we were again, delayed and slowed down, and even finding people when it opened back up who would come, and we couldn't have more than one crew in at a time. And, was all quite a slog. But we did get done. And last June, I think it was, we moved back into our unit, or into our unit on the first floor. I'm sitting in my Passive House office, and this unit is separate from the upper three units. The upper three units and the common areas, one envelope, and we are another. This was a complete gut rehab, and so we have much more control. We just had a test a couple weeks back, and we are a hair's breadth over one. So we just have a little sleuthing to do and see where we can find a few little places to bring us into compliance. We also have an issue with our hot water. It modeled up just fine, but it's not getting hot water to our master bath in time. So we have some suggestions from some people on how to mitigate that. But those are the two issues. Other than that, we are a lovely Passive House, and it's great living in this place.
Great. And I just love that you have done all this blower door testing and gotten really hands-on experience with the air tightness issues and how to address them and what happens when you don't. And you've sort of plowed that into another kind of new aspect of your career now. Can you tell us a little about that?
Oh, well, being an envelope expert, which is one of the things one becomes as a Passive House consultant, but with my additional experience of having, worked on other buildings and just in general, I'm doing expert witness work. Primarily, I work for plaintiffs, and there are houses that are rotting out from underneath people. Their walls are just crumbling, and they're due to poorly detailed drawings by architects who don't understand air sealing, and then mostly really poorly constructed buildings. And so you get terrible buildings that are just destroying people's lives. It's really sad. And what we need to help correct this, I mean, the air sealing has been in the code for a while now, and it's gotten more particular. It now says mandatory, but it's still not enforced very, very well. And what we really need, in addition to that code, because we don't want it to be after the fact, that's when it's too late. We need a special inspection like you do with an underpinning. You need to have an inspection of the wall and the flashings before the siding goes up, before the stucco goes on, before the thin brick or whatever you're, thin stone or whatever you're using is on there, and it needs to be tested at that point. And that will save millions and millions of dollars and a lot of heartache and lost income for people. I mean, this hurts both the contractors. Everyone gets hurt by this negligence.
So you have so many good ideas on how to make this better. Are you bringing this forward to the city, and are you talking to people? It seems like you're not shying away from that in general, right? So, well,
I have been talking to Green Building United about whether or not there's some capacity for making suggestions like this. I have thought about contacting Inga Saffron, and who's our Pulitzer Prize winning journalist for architecture and city planning, and suggest it to her. So I haven't activated that. I'm sort of forming my ideas on how to approach it and who to approach. But I think it's quite an epidemic here. Whether it's suburban community, gated community out in Percy or Westchester, or whether it's, a bunch of thrown up very fast row houses, a few blocks from here. I have done destructive testing and evidence gathering on both those. And I do drawing review. And I'm just it's upsetting to have our own community punt, the architecture community punt with some little note that says it's the contractor's responsibility to figure this out. I mean, that's not a good way to proceed.
So I'm curious about, so you basically look at these buildings and you identify what's wrong, and then someone has to fix it, right? Who dares to go back in and fix it?
Well, that's another part of the problem.
Okay.
Because there are whole companies that do remediation, but I'm finding that they know how to do it the old way, right? But they actually aren't following the new code. And the new code says major retrofits and remediations like this, when you're tearing a whole wall down and having to redo the stucco, you now have to meet the new building code, which means it's an R19 wall, and that's not allowed anymore. So you need to add, exterior insulation and then a rain screen with a drainage plane, airtight, and then whatever your finish is. And so I am trying to educate those people and suggest to them, although, when you're an expert witness, you can't be a third party oversight. You're either one or the other, right, for legal reasons. But in my boilerplate best practices, I talk about what air sealing is, and I talk about what the code is and what is required to inform the owner to hopefully pay that extra money to have it done right by code, and to remind the remediators that they don't want me on the other side of the fence with them. Right now we're on the same side, but I don't want to be back here in 3 to 5 years, talking to you, right, and doing DT on your work. So it's a real concern, and it's so baked in. The bad practices are baked in right now to the whole system. From inspectors through, architects and builders, and it's a major problem. So,
well, now you're working on a project where everybody's on the same page, a passive house project.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this is with Ilka and Holzram with Steve Hessler. And I first met Steve through Hugh Lofting, one of the people that took the passive house training. And Steve knows that we almost did a couple projects, one a 16-unit apartment building. But in any case, great team. The architect, Larry Weintraub, was actually on the zoning board for the neighborhood for the Italian market when I presented the Italian market. So he knew about what we did with that project. So when he got the client, when Bill called him and wanted some serious sustainability, he called me up and said, I don't know how to do this. I need a consultant. Are you game? And I said, of course I am. So I started to build a team, which is, vetting contractors. And there weren't that many for Northern New Jersey that I could find that had training. And I also vetted some what looked like quality contractors in that area. And one of them was Steve Vanadia of Vanco Construction. And, you're always, worried when someone hasn't taken the training, are we going to get a good guy or a bad guy, well-intentioned, or one of those people that says yes to your face and then goes and does what they've been doing. But Steve has really stepped up to the plate, and Bill and him actually both took the passive house training, and which is just awesome. So yes, we have an excellent
Bill
team.
is the client.
Bill is the client.
Yeah.
Bill, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Now this is 3,600 square foot workshop. That's a beautiful timber frame structure. And then a 12,000 square foot residence.
Wow.
For a couple who have a large extended family that comes to visit a lot, but it's a very big house. there's always questions about what's appropriate about that. But, you've got, it's better that a big house is a passive house than not. And this is definitely going to be a passive house. The workshop isn't going to be, and partly because it has no occupants, so it has no internal gains, and thus, we can't make it meet the program. So it's passive house inspired. It's using all the same wall systems and air tightness and everything. It's just not going for certification. So you've got program, and which gets me one of the things that we used for the first time with Bill, which is I developed this thing called the goals and values conversation. It's a list of 12 items, and it includes aesthetics and budget and water conservation and carbon and energy and renewables and blah, blah, blah. It's 12 items. And it allows one to have a deep, it's at least an hour-long conversation to listen to them, understand because we only take clients who say they want sustainable design, but that's a big, broad topic. And what the heck does that mean? So this allows us to talk about all kinds of different aspects of sustainability, understand what they know and what they think they want, but also it's an opportunity to widen their understanding, like not know what utilization versus embodied energy is. We get to explain that, and then they can go, oh, I think I want that, or nah, not that interested in that. And then we have them rank them. So we know what's important. Is it run by budget? Is it run by aesthetics? Is it run by indoor air quality, right? So that is the first time we used that tool, and it was excellent and really helped us learn a lot, because we didn't know he wanted a passive house, but he started talking about how he'd heard about this Zender energy recovery ventilator. It's like, and then he heard about air sealing. I'm like, you're talking about a passive house building here.
You're talking my language.
Exactly. So, it broadened his world, and, so we were, and that ranked list becomes a touchstone throughout the process. So when that, shiny object comes along, you can remind someone that was number 7 on their list, and we still have to take care of number 2 and 3. And I think that has helped us, this with a very well-heeled client, but it's also helped us with clients who have much more modest budgets to parse out what is important to them.
Great. Well, that's a great note there to end on. What's important to the client, and then the constructability of getting it built and getting the details right.
Yeah. What you want to do is have that conversation before you talk about whether you want, an island kitchen. You want it to be you don't want to get into, I want this, granite and that kind of a kitchen before you've talked about these big, larger, more important values and goals. And that's what is important. And the passive house community as a whole, which is much more women friendly than the engineering and architecture and construction world is as a whole, much more open to new ideas, grapples. And what I love about our community is open book. We share our failures. We share our lessons learned. I hope that doesn't diminish as we get larger and more mainstream, because that has been such an exciting and wonderful and important thing that we hold, this set of values, because we are believing, this community believes that the larger issue is mitigating climate change. And, so sharing your dirty laundry or what really worked well, or some of your trade secrets is a good thing. And it's more like a scientific community in that regard. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about you. And that's actually one of the first things I think I learned from you, years back, that we are here to support each other, right? Especially among women.
Yes.
I remember that you came up to me, you were like, okay, we have to stick together. And I think that's, that definitely stuck with me. And we have to support each other in our bigger goals. And I really appreciate what you have been doing for many, many years, and how feisty you are.
All right, and that was Laura Blau of BluPath Design. Thank you very much again, Ilka and Mary. Always great, the guests that you bring on the show. Let's start with you, Ilka. You're, as we said at the outset, you're doing some work with Laura. It sounds like a great project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great project. I mean, it's a large, basically 2 buildings, a single family home, a pretty large one, and a workshop. And the workshop's going to have a really nice timber frame in it. And we're very fortunate to work with Laura and another. It's a pretty big team. We're all working on it together. And I think for me, what's really special about this project is the client, because the client is very dedicated to Passive House. He learned about it, and we picked a builder who actually hasn't built a Passive House before. But the client actually initiated that the builder and the builder's foreman all together take a Passive House builder class. So I think they all passed their exam a couple of weeks ago, and now they're halfway to being experts in Passive House, and it's pretty amazing that they took that step.
I get the feeling that Laura might have that impression on people that she works with.
I'm sure she suggested that.
She made a couple of comments to that effect in the interview. Firstly, relating to the clients, how they're a really important part of any project team. But also that there are a lot more consultants around at the moment, and we need more Passive House builders. And she sort of put a little challenge out there to us consultants, designers, that we should recruit any builders that we can and train them on the job, which is a great time to train them, as opposed to just when people are talking about a project. The best training occurs actually on the job. And the other point about that project was that I was thinking about a little bit was she did mention it's a big project, and if you're going to build a big project, you may as well build a big Passive House, because I imagine that the clients are going to build a big house anyway. So that's kind of a given. So there could be some people saying, it's not that sustainable to have such a big house or a big building. But if it's going to be there anyway, you may as well make the most of it and make it a Passive House. So I think that was a good point.
Yeah,
Mary,
Sorry, and the other thing is that it's going to be all natural material, built out of natural low embodied carbon materials as well, where we can. So it's not only operational carbon that we're saving, but also quite a bit of embodied carbon compared to other construction methods.
Mary, what was your highlights from that?
Well, I mean, there were 2 that leap out at me, which is, as you were saying, that she's been encouraging people to get the builder training since she took it. And that was exciting that she took it. She was the only woman and only architect in the builder training. I think it was back in 2018 that she took it. It gave her a whole new perspective on constructability of details and keeping details simple, that I think is a really good reminder for many architects. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I think Laura has been around for a long time. I think she actually took that builder training in 2009, before a lot of other things have happened.
Yeah. And she alluded to the coming together of lots of other certifications, lots of other tools. She's clearly had a motivation for sustainability. for a long time, and I quite like her reminder to us all, I guess, that it's no use fighting against other certification tools when there's, we need to work together relatively quickly to get things done, and we can, and there's some really good examples of that. Things like crosswalks between LEED or Green Star as it is in Australia, and Passive House. So it's really great to see concrete examples of where different rating systems are incorporating things like Passive House and working together. Zach, what were highlights for you?
Well, just piggybacking on what you were just talking about, I was enjoyed learning about the origin story of Green Building United, and how important she felt like the decision to make the Passive House group in Philadelphia non-denominational and open to all comers, whether they're from the PHI and from the FIAS communities, and that's something that, of course, the Accelerator is also committed to, and then extending that spirit of kind of ecumenicalism or ecumenical spirit to the other green building standards for Green Building United, I think was important. So it's not just a matter of not fighting, but like actually figuring out where the significant common ground is among these different certification organizations and the practitioners who do Living Building Challenge and Passive House, and and using that as that kind of bringing people power together to make a difference in the community, I think is compelling, and it was great to hear about.
Yeah. Something that stood out for me was Laura mentioned working as an expert witness and that she'd had experience doing destructive testing, which is awesome. And because I've done a little bit of that for a short period. I worked as a building surveyor, which meant I got to go along and see what condition existing buildings are in and find faults. And I think it's really useful for architects to get experience, not just of how to put their drawings together on a construction site, but also any chance you get. And remediation is quite good. The remediation work or remodeling work is quite good because you also get to see inside of a existing building, and it means you get to see where things have gone wrong. And I think that's really powerful as a learning opportunity, because you get to see potential weaknesses of designs or where moisture can get in and the damage that occurs, and it makes you think about how to avoid that from happening and how to design better. So it's not something that all architects or designers or even builders necessarily get the chance to do, but if you do get the chance to do any pulling old buildings apart or existing buildings, it is a very valuable experience.
Yeah, and I think what stood out for me is that then she took it a little further, saying we should have inspections earlier or at certain points to avoid, all this bad outcome. Because on the one hand, yes, all the builders, and she talked about this kind of medallion certification, where maybe you don't have to be an expert on passive house building in general, but maybe in your field, what you're doing, you can learn that, specific to what you're doing, which is a little less daunting, I think, than going through a whole builder training. So I think she's very much promoting better education, of the builders, but then also a lot more oversight in terms of inspections and just kind of more control over even code that has been put in place by now, which is air sealing and some other things that are there but are not really what's the word,
not enforced,
exactly.
So I was wondering about that. So it sounds like air sealing is now it's in the code in your local area, but it doesn't get checked on.
Yeah, I think it really, I think by now we definitely see it more that just regular construction. There needs to be a blower door test as well, but it's been taking a few years where that is actually being enforced. But it's definitely in the code now. Yeah.
Meanwhile, back down in New Zealand, I dream of a time when most builders would even know what a blower door is. We certainly have a long way to go down that path, but hopefully we'll get there. Great stuff. Anything else, Mary or Zach?
Well, as long as we're talking about blower doors, her experience doing blower door tests on so many buildings after she got trained by Chris Benedict, or at least Chris Benedict did a demonstration I thought was great, to be able to understand, as you said, to be able to really get experience on what makes a building leak and what doesn't. And that she was able to bring that to the retrofit. Of course, I was excited about hearing about the retrofit of her own building, and the realities of trying to do that, and that it's taken such a long time to do. But that's often the case, that retrofits are long and complicated. So, for people who are struggling to do it on their own homes, I think it's fun to hear about somebody else's story that,
that's right.
It's not a simple 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
It's great. It's great seeing the before and after photos, but doing the hard work and chasing down all those leaks can be quite time consuming.
The whole building performance boom, funded by the Recovery Act, American Recovery Act funds after the recession, had an impact on Laura's practice, and she really, I think, was creative in taking advantage of that and figuring out how to do all those building performance jobs at a time when there wasn't a lot of architectural work, and then that, of course, formed a foundation for her passive house practice. So it was good to hear. I think that we sometimes bemoan the fact that home performance market blew up when there was a lot of public money for it, and then it has kind of almost disappeared since then, and that's frustrating. But it's good to hear stories like this to remember that the professional development and knowledge gained during that time is still making a difference in our industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked quite a lot, Zach, about how many people got going, and that the recession kind of spawned a whole bunch of creativity and new businesses. So there's a lot of good news. There's a lot of pain that goes when people went through, but a lot of good stuff came out the other side.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. So, hey, awesome stuff. Thank you again, Mary and Ilka. Always fantastic to hear the wonderful guests that you bring on to the show with some really important messages. I like particularly just closing out how Laura commented about the sense of community in Passive House, and she really hopes that gets retained as Passive House grows, and people don't stop sharing their learning, both positive and lessons for how to improve things in the future, and being quite humble about that, which Laura's a really good example of. All right, Zach, what do we got coming up?
Well, at the Accelerator this Wednesday, we have, so Thursday your time, Matthew, we have a construction tech edition of the Passive House Accelerator live program. We will be joined by Josh Salinger of Bird's Mouth Design Build, which is a really cool firm in Portland, Oregon. Josh has also been part of Passive House Northwest for many years, and that's how I met him on the board there. And he is going to be presenting a really cool presentation, really cool information about concrete-free slab-on-grade foundations. So concrete-free slab-on-grade foundations with Josh Salinger on Wednesday. Then we have tons of stuff coming up. It's going to be a very busy April and May and June in the Passive House community. And we will share information about what's coming up from all these different organizations. But the first two that are on the docket are One, the FIAS Developer Summit, which happens April 26th through 28th. Multi-day developer summit diving into single-family development, multifamily development, and financing. And then on May 1st through 3rd, we have the Humid Climate Conference, which is presented by the Austin chapter of the FIAS Alliance. And I'm going to be going down there and speaking at that conference. They're a great slate of speakers. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's just a taste, though. There are a whole bunch of other ones that are coming up. So check out the link in the show notes.
Awesome. Great stuff. And as always, go and check out the rest of the Passive House Accelerator website for lots more awesome resources and upcoming events if you missed all of that. Mary, Ilka, thank you again. We'll see you back hopefully in a few weeks on the podcast. And Zach, we'll catch up again next week with another interview, and look forward to more on the pod then.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.